The following is a conversation with Alan Byrne. Look, I'm going to be honest, I don't know off the top of my head all the levels of expertise that Alan currently has, so I'm going to read you through a few things from the phone. Ignore my ignorance by not looking at the camera. Alan currently is working in the City of Dublin Education and Training Board in education development, specifically in adult education. He holds a first-class honours degree in sports science and health. He has a master's in teaching. He's also an iTech tutor and accredited qualified PT and gym instructor, a UEFA licensed coach, and much, much more. He was also the director of coaching in Lourdes Celtic for 8 years. Alan has a holistic view on sports coaching, where he links the theory of academia with the practicality of what volunteers have to deal with on the ground. We also touch on the free access to adult education in Ireland, particularly in the City of Dublin, in the role that Alan works in currently. We hope you enjoy the podcast. Please remember to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Thank you.
The Trainer 1-to-1 podcast is proudly sponsored by Financial Planning Matters. We recently recorded a latest episode with the founder of Financial Planning Matters, Niall O'Connor. In the episode, we talk about a couple of the basics of what the services they provide do, ways to get in contact, and just various stories about managing your financial future. Here is the thumbnail, and you can find the link for that video in the show notes below.
Alan, thanks for joining us today. How are you keeping?
Good, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Nice. For anyone who wouldn't know about your current role, what is your current role?
I work for the City of Dublin Education Training Board in education development in a section known as adult education.
Okay.
Do you want me to elaborate on what that is a little bit? So my role is working within Dublin South Central in encouraging, I suppose, local community groups or adults back to education, looking at course design for certain courses, supporting tutors that deliver and teachers that deliver the courses, but working very much with disadvantaged communities or marginalised learners, such as people out of education for a long time, long-term unemployed, migrant communities, people coming through addiction recovery programs, and your general population as well. We have a lot of retirees coming in, and it might be something like unaccredited community education to a QQI module. Somebody may go on then to one of our FET colleges like Pearse College. They may go on to third level, they may go into unemployment that way, but every learner's journey is quite different. Wow. And every day is a different challenge, I suppose, in terms of who you're working with and why you're working with them. You know?
I was going to say, what are the biggest obstacles with that, do you find?
I suppose you're trying to break down barriers to learn. You're trying to really encourage people to come back, because it's second chance education, adult education. So for people that have had a really poor prior experience of education, sometimes that can be a tough conversation to have in terms of come back to adult education. It's not what you may have experienced before. It's a lot less formal. There's a big hang up about, I suppose, exams, we've all been there. So it's a terrifying notion, that idea of assessment or exams, or you're being assessed. So sometimes that gentle reintroduction to education is just come along to this non-accredited class in psychology. Just learn for learning's sake, for fun, for the lifelong element of it. And then if you really want to kind of go on further and be certified, well, then we have courses for that too. But you're essentially working at kind of bringing people's self-confidence, self-belief back that may have been missing. And you're working with community groups too. So we have our college centres, but we also work with a lot of community groups, like groups for adults with intellectual disabilities, groups such as Walk, Dublin 12 Autism. So we work with a lot of advocacy groups as well to kind of create opportunities for parents, adults themselves, or within the local community in the addiction recovery schemes. So we work with a very diverse range of people.
I was going to say,
so it can be really transient in terms of what you're doing on Monday versus what you're doing on Friday, you know. So it's quite a versatile role. Yeah, I enjoy it.
Big time. How did you get involved in that line of work?
Purely by accident, I suppose. So I suppose bring it back. So I worked for the City of Dublin ETB. I was a teacher in Pearse College. I worked a bit in Crumlin College too, on both sports courses, but mainly in Pearse College. The way the teaching hours work when you become a teacher is you have to work up your hours. So you do your masters, like anybody else, you become teaching council licensed. You then go through a process, and a lot of people are probably not aware of this, and friends of mine, colleagues in the teaching profession are the same. You build up your hours. I remember helping the current Rovers, one of the current Rovers keepers, Lee Stacey, has gone through education, and I was helping Lee with his masters, and he was transitioning from on post into kind of the teaching profession, and he's done really well. And I was trying to explain this concept of building up your hours, and he was saying, "But I thought you just, you get your job and that's it." I said, "No, it's not like your traditional career." So to come around the long way to how did I end up in that side of the ETB? I was working in Pearse College. I got up to about 15 hours of a contract. I hadn't got a full-time contract. A role came up, which was a full-time role. It was in education development. I have a strong background in community work, having worked within grassroots clubs. The sports science, teaching, coaching side of things married well with the role in terms of there was a lot of the kind of relationship building, stakeholder work aspect to it. I interviewed, I got it. I'm almost 2 years into that role now.
Great.
So it's still working for the City of Dublin. We still would mix a lot with the colleges and other sectors of provision within the service. I run a health and physical literacy project for them at the minute, which involves providing football for people in direct provision centres, people in recovery schemes. That's running at the minute. So I still get to do a little bit of coaching. It's a nice role. It's a different role. But that's how I came to it. I wanted something more secure. I had bills to pay. I've got kids. I'm like, I'm a regular guy that has to kind of have to pay the mortgage and everything else. So I just wanted something that was a full-time job in education, as opposed to a number of different roles in sport, making up one overall job, so to speak.
And on the adult education aspect, there was obviously a wide range of different people, ethnicity groups, communities, etc. What is like the common, I would say, denominator between all of them when it comes to pushback? Is it purely the fear of exams, or is it just the fear of the system itself, if that makes sense?
It can be, so no two people are the same and no two groups are the same, but I suppose the commonality that I've come across is a lack of awareness that the service exists.
I never knew it existed.
Well, I'm going to be quite honest and candid, and maybe when my colleagues listen back to this, they'll say, well, really, I wasn't aware, and I worked for the City of Dublin ETB. I had heard of adult education service, but I wasn't aware that it was a free service. There's a free guidance counsel service. They're fully accredited tutors working within the service. The range of subjects that they offer are pretty much the same, up to QQI level 5 in nearly all cases. They offer both accredited and unaccredited classes. I think sometimes when you're going to people with, like, if I meet a new community group, for argument's sake, or I get a call to go meet a new group to set up a course for them, or to put a tutor into their centre to teach their members, I suppose, there's almost like a lack of belief in that. Is this free? Like, there has to be something.
Yeah, there's a catch.
I don't know if it's an Irish thing where there has to be some kind of catch, or but that's probably the biggest thing that I've come across is that, how is this free, or why is this, or why are you doing this for us? Because I think sometimes when people have come through a certain amount of trauma, which a lot of migrants, a lot of people coming into the country may have experienced, people with poor past experience of education, particularly people in the later stage of retiree years, they would have attended in Ireland quite a different educational Ireland, let's say, and they've often said to me, like, we didn't know this, we didn't realise this was free, and there's a reluctance. You have to give your PPS number, because we're a state agency. You have to give your PPS number like you would if you go to the GP. Some of the conversations I'd have with elderly people are demystifying the fact that you can trust us. This we're going to be sensitive with this data. You can access these free classes, but we just need to, because we're funded through Solace, so they will fund a lot of our work. So I suppose it's breaking down that the commonality is trust. It's just knowing that we're there for genuine reasons and genuine intent. When community groups come to work with us, or they're looking for funding from us, you're spending most of your time building a relationship, and that can take, in some cases, it can happen quite quickly. In other cases, not so much. Like some of the marginalised communities within Dublin, not so far from here. I'm not, to be fair to the communities, I'm not going to name them because I don't want to stigmatise them or put them into that bracket. But what I'd say is that they're probably so used to services coming into them, or state agencies coming into them, or they've got a bad relationship with maybe the police service, the guards. They have a bad relationship with their local schools, or they're just not used to being supported and helped. So when you go in there, you're almost trying to break down that, I suppose, fear of here's another statutory body coming in to tell us what to do. Or you know, where we're coming from a good point. We really do want to widen participation in education. We want to let people know that education shouldn't have to cost the earth. And we want to let people know that you're never too old to begin, and you're never too late to finish, or too old to finish in education. So that's the kind of role. I almost see it like a social worker type teacher role. I still go into the classroom sometimes. I still do a little bit of teaching and the health science end of things because it ties in with the area I'm qualified in. And I get to work with some great groups. I get to work with some people that have come through recovery schemes that have had a difficult experience of their life in one way or another, become addicted to a substance, has turned their life upside down, and now they've come through recovery and they're in that good space where they want to re-engage in society and kind of build their own self-esteem, self-confidence again. And I probably learned more from that side of it than anything, because when I came into the service, I was used to teaching in a Pearse College, in a sports course, with young lads and ladies wanting to be football coaches, soccer coaches. And that was a very clear-cut thing for me. Here's your 7 modules, here's your assessments, not without its challenges as well. And it's, like I said, a fantastic place to work, Pearse College, a fantastic course. But when I went to the adult ed, it was like, okay, now we want you to do similar, but now you're going to work with people that don't trust you from the beginning, not through any fault of their own. But so that's probably, in a nutshell, kind of the commonalities or you know, that all those groups share.
Fascinating.
Education's an interesting one because you chat to anyone, even like, let's say any of our mates or people we would have grew up with, and it's always the issues people have with it is always about like you said, the system, whereas it's all centered around knowledge essentially, and you're trying to get the idea across that come this free class and look, it could be a psychology, whatever it is, and you might just find, Jesus, that really interests me. And then people would say, oh, but I didn't like school because I didn't like English and maths, let's say. But the pursuit is actually in a very specific knowledge that you want to get, so to speak. It's fascinating, I find. Yeah.
And we, like, the minute you talk about education to anybody, you kind of say, well, what was your favourite subject? That's one of the ones I kind of use. You kind of end up with this little toolbox of phrases, and if you're talking to people, I'd kind of say to them, what subjects did you like in school, to get to know a bit about what they liked. I kind of start with that before, you know, we can build a course from nothing there, but we need to find out what people want. What I've noticed is they tend to tell you the subject they like, but it wasn't the subject, it was the teacher.
And
it's always a nice story about, I had this teacher, he or she was great because they let us do this, or more than often let us out to the yard to play football, or you know, something. But the big thing there is it's a good positive memory that they've anchored, that they realised, well, that's something I can cling to. Where realistically, when people are talking about, they're not really talking about the subjects. No. They're talking about the experience they had within that system. And what we're trying to do is to kind of reframe what education is, as in this non-threatening thing where anybody can do it. You can go back at I was 32 going back to education, like formal education. I didn't have a terrible experience in school. I went to Sing Street Secondary School. It was a great sporting school. Didn't do amazingly well in my leaving cert. I done foundation maths. I ended up going and doing sports science degree. I learned maths in a different way because I related it to sport. We all have to learn in our own way. And I think if we try and force a system onto people, that's where we go wrong. I think we have the conversations first, and then we realise if we can see that spark in somebody, well, then we know what they're interested in, and then we can teach them. You know, I think that's where we've probably gone wrong in the past. It's kind of a cookie cutter approach to education. This is what we have. This is what you can do, rather than what would you like, and move from there. You know.
Yeah, back to the aspect there that you said about, let's say, picking out a teacher that they enjoyed versus the subject. That even comes down to trust as well, doesn't it? Because at least a bond was created there. And what I found very interesting about school, the three of us, I remember we used to talk about this like at the kitchen table till like 3 or 4
I remember this conversation.
Just about what we would do differently with schools. And this is when we just came out of, and we were all in third level qualifications, or in pursuing third level qualifications. And one thing that I often found was very interesting with school was that I always got the impression that teachers never wanted to be there, which meant that I didn't want to learn their subject because I just didn't think there was like a mutual respect coming across that. How do you find the relationship between these tutors specifically in the adult education program, and why are they doing this teaching versus being in universities or private schools or anything along those lines? What have you found there?
I think there's many different motivating factors for why they'd want to work within that section of provision in the city of Dublin. A lot of them, like myself, probably would have been further education teachers and moved across to that service. Why they work there, there's probably a bit of more degrees of freedom in terms of they don't all have to teach QQI. So there's not folders of assessment for each student, which is nice. It's a more informal education. There could be a purpose in them that they want to work with the most marginalised in society. And as difficult as it is, it's very, very rewarding. It's very, very rewarding when you do see people come to you at very low levels of confidence and come out the other side. Now, it's no different from most colleges when people go in. It's transformative in nature. Why do teachers want to work in that side of it as opposed to third level? Maybe because they need, well, if you're teaching in third level, you need to be a PhD candidate now.
Yeah.
Or you need to have your doctorate complete. So that's a barrier in itself, costs and everything else. Some people are non-academic. So they're more kind of ingrained to go towards that kind of more personal touch. It's more of a facilitator than a teacher. So we think of the teachers as a chalk and talk. We sat in a linear fashion in the classroom and they stood at the top of the classroom, chalk and talk. It was that very old traditional method of teaching. I was the same when I went to secondary school. This is more a facilitator of learning in the adult education service. So the rooms are laid out in a very, sometimes a horseshoe shape. It's kind of like a cafe style.
Yeah.
It's very laid back. It's kind of, you come to class 1 week, you don't particularly have to go every week. And the pressures are not the same. Pressures are not there. You know, the aim with adult education is to keep people in education. You know, so their outcomes are their outcomes.
Yeah.
The teachers' motivations for teaching there, I'd say, are kind of a combination of the atmosphere of it and the environment of it. The values of it being that you're there to serve everyone in society in terms of helping everybody learn. Some people specialise, or some teachers like working with groups with additional needs. And from year one they come in, they might stay with a group like that they could be 10 years. We have a psychology teacher retiring this year after 40 odd years in the service. So very few teachers come into it and just leave. You know, the majority of them stay, and that's a good indicator that what they're doing that they like. I think there's a bit more pressure in FE teaching. When I was teaching in further ed, so you'd like your Pearce College, September is a very busy time of year because you've got a whole new cohort of students coming in. And May is a very busy time of year because you've got exam folders. You have to correct them, mark them, assess them, validate them. So maybe there's less pressure as an adult education teacher as opposed to a mainstream further education. There's still City of Dublin. Yeah. Still same organisation. Yeah. Just a different...
Makes sense. Yeah, I was just trying to get a bit more of an insight, you know. But even just for you personally, so one thing that we'd be advocates of sport for, particularly football, is that, look, we all watch, even with City and Madrid on the TV at the moment, it's so difficult to get to the pinnacle of professional football. It's difficult even to play in some of the lower leagues out of the top division. And we always say that sport and football, obviously, because that's obviously what we're all involved in, is a vehicle for a better life. And one thing that I noted there that was interesting was, even for maths, for example, it was much easier to learn maths combining it with sport. And that's just an example of where the relationship of being a participant in sport definitely helps other parts in life. So even on the sporting side, on the football side, on the coaching side, where did that journey start, and how have you seen that taper in a positive trajectory over the last decades or so?
So in terms of where did my journey start in terms of coaching? And
just on the coaching side, yeah.
To be honest, I played for Lourdes Celtic schoolboy football. Played up until I was 17, 18. Had no real aspirations to play at a high level. I done okay. I was kind of interested in coaching, but from afar. I was interested in looking at guys. So we guys in the club at the time, Eddie Roach, Barrett Bradley, these men at that time were in their 50s, 60s. Morris Price, really kind of old traditional before the coaching badges and licenses were out. These were men who just stood on sidelines and gave their time. And I was always kind of standing back kind of going, why are they doing that? No, I don't get what's the driver of that. So of course, about 18, 19 years of age, I was asked to help out with an under 11 team. I was handed a bag of footballs. And of course, what did I do? A rondo, because that's what I was used to doing myself in training. I hadn't a clue what I'd what to do, hadn't a clue what a coach was. Went from that to kind of shadowing the more senior coaches for a year or two, and then got my own team, and then it progressed over time to a point where I was like, I think I need some kind of license or something to kind of maybe just to validate what I already know, or to learn something new, and then start going through the licenses. And then I had my own business for 10 years, and a recession hit Ireland, and my wife said, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I made blinds and curtains, so I've done that for a 10-year period up until about 2011. And she said, why don't you go to college to study to be a coach? And I was laughing, like, there's no profession, like nobody paid to be a coach in Ireland, like this back 2010, 11. And she Googled a course, and she came across Pearse College. And she's like, there's a course here, go to that course, and you can still do a bit of part-time work or whatever. So I done that. I done the 2-year coaching certificate. I went on from there. I was kind of, but people in the college encouraged me then, you should go on, you should do further study. So that kind of gave me a real taste then for, I suppose, learning. Again, I went on and studied sports science. That gave me further insights into what I wanted to do. I became director of coaching during that time. And I got a real taste of them working with coaches. I was always fascinated with what's behind why we do what we do.
Mm-hmm.
What are the theories that underpin, or what is there evidence for what people are saying they're doing or what we're doing? Or I'd look at the really good coaches, the really applied coaches that had no academic training or no formal qualifications, but yet they were fantastic in their soft skills and how they communicated their message, how they got their message across real succinctly. You know, and they knew enough about tactics and technical aspects of the game just because they'd spent a lot of time in the game and learned from other people. So I was kind of amazed with how they were able to get by without all this academic side of it. So I wanted to be more kind of, you hear that term, pra-academic. I wanted to have that blend of the pitch stuff with the academia, put it together. The more I done that, the more I realised the similarities between coaching and teaching.
Mm-hmm.
I said, well, maybe there's not that full-time role in sport that I'm after at that time. I was doing my master's in teaching, and I'd done my practicum, which is my placement in Pearse College. And the principal then said, we've got hours here for you when you qualified. And that's how it started. So my coaching went from grassroots football volunteer. So I meant to say I became a qualified strength and conditioning coach with UKSA. Prior to just doing my sports science degree, I started to pick up some coaching work in terms of strength and conditioning with different sports actually as well. So that gave me good insight into different clubs in sports, rugby clubs, basketball clubs and stuff like that. So it was almost like the more I learned, you're digging a bigger pit.
Yeah.
And you're thinking there's something at the bottom of that pit, but I don't know what it is. But I think I just have to keep digging. And I don't know why, but I'm going to keep digging. And I finished a year postgrad in Trinity just there this year. So I'm not finished. Like, I'm still on that, I suppose, journey of I don't know what. But what I can say is that every year it has improved me as a person, as a human being. It has helped me to help others. So the coaching journey is not confined now to sport, I don't think, anymore. I think coaching you can apply to anything. I think that's something that's lost on, especially a lot of young coaches when they get involved in, I'd say, football.
We both fell down that rabbit hole, I'd say.
Yeah, I think we all do. And I think, like, I'd convinced myself I was the best coach in the world after studying coaching for 1 year. It's that thing of that, the less you know, the more you think you know. And I thought I was an expert after a year, and Pearse College, I know everything, and you reflect over time, and then you're learning. And I know it's cliche to say the more you learn, the less you know, but it's true, because you're kind of constantly open. It's like a Pandora's box. The further you get down the coaching, or the more you get into coaching or coaching science or the art of coaching or the science of coaching or somewhere in the middle of that, the more it becomes nearly a philosophical question of what is coaching.
It is, yeah.
It really becomes that. But like, I love coaching. I love being on a pitch with an under-8s team. I love the next day being on a pitch with a group of lads coming out of a recovery scheme playing five-a-side. I love being out in a direct provision centre in Finglas. The universal language of coaching is that you can help everybody. It's not confined to high-performance sport. Not that there's anything wrong with that at all. But I think to become a coach is a great thing for any profession. And I think one of the things that's helped me massively in terms of if I went for an interview for anything in a teaching capacity, I'll always lean back on my time as a volunteer coach, as a director of coaching, because the interpersonal skills and the communication skills you pick up are massive. So my coaching journey was, like I said, I started out as a volunteer coach at a grassroots club in an ordinary working class community. The more I studied, the more opportunities I got. The more opportunities I took that were very uncomfortable and in different sports, the more I seemed to grow. And then it just helped me career-wise from there and in. And I don't know, I could go back to coaching full-time. I don't know. But that's been, my journey's kind of taken just lots of turns, but turns in, surprising ways, I suppose.
It's a big thing I say to young coaches now, and not that I'm an old coach, but even when we have coaches come into us, because across, let's say, 3 hours in one of our venues, you could work with like a 5-year-old up to like a 16-year-old, and that's kind of one thing that catches people sometimes. They're like, the first one of them actually said it to me, he was like, just the way you speak so different to the first hour compared to the last hour, and that like being able to work across age groups is massive, I think, whether you want to be the best coach in the world or not, because if you can relate something to a 5-year-old as to a 16-year-old, it can then carry on. A question I was going to ask is there any purely principles from your coaching that you had at the start that you would still hold true to now if you were to, let's say, coach a team or go into a coaching role, do you think?
Just being, when I started out of coaching, what I done was probably a replication of what I'd seen. So I probably, we're all a collage of other people, I think, in certain ways. So we'll have been coached by people that we will take on some of their characteristics. We'll take on characteristics of either a role model or father figure or, a maternal figure in their life, or an older brother or sister, So you're nearly not yourself when you're coaching. You're just replicating what you've seen or what you've done. The thing I'd hold on to, I suppose, is from when I started to now, is just to be yourself. And I think if you try and be somebody else or try and be something else, it's not long you can maintain that. I think if you're true to yourself and you be yourself with people, and you're not trying to keep up a pretense of this ideal coach or who I would like to be rather than who I am. I think that's probably the thing that's kept me a little bit, I suppose, humble, to be able to say you don't know everything. The people that you're coaching may know a little bit more than you about something. The age-specific side of it is something I've had to learn over time. And I'd say that the coaches doing the DOC work, and you've had coaches come for, advice. Sometimes you'll say to them in the kind of straight language, like, look, you've spent the past 5 years coaching that one team from age, you're probably over familiar, would you not take a week or two out, go coach the girls 16s, or, there's a bit of that. And then sometimes just reassuring people, I suppose, in terms of coaching children, like you say, pedagogy, coaching adults, andragogy. It's two different theories, two different ways of coaching, two different ways of communicating. You're coaching adults, you're building on prior experience. You're coaching children, you're building new experiences. So it's a totally different approach. And people can get dismayed by that when they go coach one age group and then they go to another, and someone saying, why are you talking that way to them and not them? Because there is two different approaches. But I suppose the thing that's kept me is just to be myself and to realise I have limitations. I don't know everything. I have a lot to learn. And when every coaching practice that I take, or every interaction I have, is a chance to learn, whether it be from a more experienced coach, a less experienced coach, because they've got lessons that we have blind spots. So, for all the learnings that we do, you'll get someone coming along new to the sport, will do something, and you'll kind of go, hang on a second, I'm 25 years coaching with all this experience, qualifications, how come I didn't think of that? Because they've not got the biases that we have. So it's supposed just being true to yourself is what's, I suppose, maintain me right the way through.
You touched on something very interesting there. I'd never heard those theoretical terms before. So what is it called when you coach kids? So
you hear it referred to, I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. So pedagogy or pedagogy is the science of teaching in general, but it's particularly like think of like so pediatrics, the word PD. So pedagogy obviously is children, and obviously children learn through discovery, play, interaction. That's why you've got people like the theorists like Piaget and Montessori. It's all play and discovery, and they learn by doing. So it's learning by interacting with their environment. And that's why when we advocate for coaching children, it's always in a play-based, that's why we see a lot of SSGs. With children, we see a lot of time spent building up the technical skills, the mastery in and around the ball, because they're becoming comfortable with different parts of the foot, etc. Whereas if you take experienced professional footballer and you go back to the very, 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 and I don't mean basics, because we never leave the basics, but they already have that experience. So you're trying to build on that already, on that lived experience. So that's andragogy. So adult learning is different in that adults are motivated to learn in a different way. They choose why they go back to learning. Children we put into a learning environment. You know, so andragogy, although it has similarities to pedagogy, there are different ways you will coach or teach adults as opposed to children. Children learn through the built environment. You know, adults choose to go back to learning for their for whatever, but we're building on their prior learning. Whereas if we take a child in and they've never played football at all, and they come into a team at the age of 7, we're teaching them how to hold a paintbrush. We're teaching the adult how to paint the picture or improve the picture they already know.
Or a different style of painting.
Or a different style or different way to hold. You know, whereas the children, when children come in, it's that kind of thing of, well, what is a paintbrush? What is, you know, to use that analogy, what is paint? What does it mean to paint a picture? Whereas with adults, you're trying to nearly nudge them towards the information, but they've got it. But you become more of a, I want to say like a psychologist nearly when you're coaching adults as opposed to when you're coaching children, because then it becomes more about, you know, what kind of day have they had, and you're going into the specifics of the soft skills. Whereas with children, they come up to your training, your main, I suppose, focus is, my outcome here is that they really, really enjoy this session, that they can tell me a couple of things that they've learned at the end and they want to come back on Thursday. Where the adults' motivators could be completely different. They may want to get better at a certain thing, have a very specific reasons, positionally why they're with you. You know, a very specific reason why they want to improve upon a skill or their tactical understanding of the game. So it's two different things we're trying to teach. That can be difficult.
That's absolutely fascinating.
I've never heard of
andragogy, yeah.
I've heard of pedagogy, yeah. Well, I never heard the separate term.
To be honest, I never heard it until I studied my the teaching. Until I went back to study to be a teacher, effectively, I'd come across pedagogy loads over the years in sports science. It's big in sports science. Going back to the major theorists in around play and discovery, and we would have studied it a lot in terms of motor skill. So motor skill development and strength and conditioning and stuff like that. But andragogy, I'd never come across until I started to learn to be a teacher. And the more I'm with adults, the more it makes so
sense,
much sense to me.
Yeah, it is fascinating. And the reason why I think it just particularly interested me there was, I think we have the luxury of being able to coach, as Gary said, like lads that are professional footballers all the way into 5 years of age. And I think a commonality that parents struggle with is that they would see us working, let's say, on a one-to-one basis, a one coach to one player with, let's say, a senior male or female pro, and they would want the same thing for their child. So we'd get a lot of inbound requests about like taking a player, like one coach to one player. And that was something that we just would never move forward with, purely because we would think that the environment, the play aspect is the most important thing for kids, which is something that you just can't do on a one player to one coach aspect. Would that be something, would I be correct in saying that it is best practice for kids to be playing with kids? The coach is just a facilitator of the environment versus, you know, nailing in specific information.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on it. So that's the first thing I have to say, is that I'm not an expert on it, and skill acquisition or any of that. But I know enough about it to say, I suppose, from my viewpoint.
Yeah.
Okay, so from my viewpoint, yeah, you're a facilitator of learning, especially when you're dealing with children. You're guiding them towards the outcomes. You're more question based in terms of, it's almost like a game of Cluedo. Who done it? Why did they do it? Where did they do it? You know, that pass you just played was brilliant. Now tell me why it was brilliant. The timing of it, like the execution of a technique, when does that become skill? Because they do it at the right time in the game. Then it's a skill. So when you're working with people and you're teaching that isolation technique, you know, you're honing those skills to be able to use it at the right time in the game. But you can't go run onto the pitch and then tell them to do it at that time. That becomes a cognitive aspect of it. To chime into what you're saying about, and I get it, the parables with children and then parents asking, could you do something similar that the adults are doing? The lack of understanding there with parents is understandable because they're not coaches in a lot of cases. So we have to remember what they're trying to do is they're trying to get the children to perform an outcome without the 20 years of experience that it might take for them to visualize the perception and the action. So what happens between the timing of making a decision, seeing the ball, the cognitive element, that works and built up in layers over years. That's something you can teach, how to recognize a pass coming in, your body shape and all that sort of stuff. But the only way you're really going to learn it is to do it. And you can teach somebody to drive around the block or in a car park with no other cars, and they'll become very good at driving around the car park with no other cars. But now ask them to go out into the road where there's traffic coming from the left and the right, and you have the cognitive aspect of it as well. So when parents ask, it's very similar to coaches. What I see a lot of new coaches doing is, when you go and observe sessions at the start, they're doing stuff that's not age specific. And when you ask them, like, what are you working on? Like, can I help you with anything? They'll say, I've seen this brilliant drill.
Yeah.
Cool, where'd you see it? Saw it on YouTube, or Real Madrid under 21s. And they're down with the 8s doing it. Like, and the coach then is getting frustrated because they're putting adult expected outcomes on children. They're not doing it from a bad point. They've actually, I think that's a brilliant thing that they've gone off, spent time, researched, because they're coming from a good area. Now, committees will say to you, well, they're up there and they have to get, and I'm like, the guy's doing it because he cares, and we have to help him now and guide him in the right direction towards the right resources. And then you're stripping it back down and you're kind of giving year on year what the expectations might be for children. And it's not an ages and stages thing, because 1 6-year-old could do something that a 10-year-old could do, and vice versa. It's not a case of that. There's different levels of maturity, but it's managing the expectations of the parents to be able to tell them, we're working on what we're working on at this stage of that player's development for a very particular reason. When they get to that stage, we'll choose the time to help them develop those competencies, but it's probably one of the biggest challenges in coaching, in terms of making that distinction between what a recreational novice child is versus what a fully experienced, competent, confident professional athlete is. They're two totally different things. We can't expect a Ferrari to do what a Nissan Micra can do, and vice versa. They're different machines, different processes, different equipment, etc.
Yeah, you made a great point there about the 20 years of experiences and layers, and I would say just cognitively being in an environment where there's pressure coming from left, right, and even if you break it down to like those simple core principles of even like this, let's say doing like a drag back, like, is it situational dependent? Does it have, or like, is this professional player or this kid, used to doing it, in their own half? Do they understand the repercussions of if that fails? And all of those things cannot be done on a one coach to one player specifically. You have to get punished by your players, like your teammates in the game environment, because there's nothing that, like, even if I remember back to training, like even making the jump to like senior football, there's nothing more scarring than hearing a senior player, really lay the tone correctly. And that nothing came from the coach. That was all the environment, and I just thought you just opened my eyes there, like, wow, like that's the academic side. So I know you said there the perfect balance is like the blend of between the academic side and the practical side. I think it was a pracademia. It's a good way to say it. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, like that it's clicking, like there's something ringing a bell here,
Yeah, and it's just getting an understanding that expectations, what do we expect from children, what do we expect from, like I'm coaching in a grassroots club this Saturday. We've 50 something coaches, and it's around athletic development, and our first weekend of workshops is going to be age specific to the younger ages. And the point I'm trying to get across is, if you look at coaches, they're fitness crazy with some of the younger kids and stuff. And I'm like, love a movement, teach them to move well before they develop muscle mass, before they work on all the sprint stuff. But the key point I'm trying to make for them is, let the kids enjoy themselves, let them move well, move in as many different positions and ranges as possible, that when we do load them with the heavier stuff, that they're able for it. Cognitively, that same applies. Put children in problem-rich environments. Put them in an SSG where they have to solve the problem. Tell them there's a goal in that corner and a goal in that corner, but don't specifically go out and direct them like you would an adult. This is what I want you to do and how I want you to do it. I just want you to score a goal. And then within that small game, identify the little cognitive solutions that they come up with themselves. Because they'll find solutions. So if we remember, pedagogy is children discovering through play. And And we coach them in that manner. We're coaching them age specifically to come up with their own solutions, because when we put them onto a football pitch, we want them to be able to perceive the action and come up with a solution. That's what we want them to do. So it's just having that problem-rich solution that they can discover it, and it's more fun.
Yeah.
It's more fun if they do it themselves, and kids will tell you that themselves, you know.
100%.
Moving into your kind of director coaching role, look, we talk about this all the time with different guests, that Irish football, what we need, like facilities, all this sort of stuff. What are the practical ways you could see that grassroots clubs could improve their current processes, we'll say?
From my own learnings in the role.
Yeah.
So like other DOCs are different, and other clubs have different resources, etc. I think an untapped resource is the parents, the cohort of parents. So what I found over the years is I tried a number of times to set up a parents' council in the same way schools. If you look at most schools that are successful with fundraising and stuff like that, or clubs, they have a high parent involvement. What we tend not to see, so in a club like the club where I was DOC, the highest amount of kids we had at one point was nearly 700. A multiplier effect of that, if you think of the parents or guardians or, you know, whatever the family dynamic is, it was above 2,500 people. Wow. You know, parents, grandparents, siblings.
Yeah.
If we were to whittle down a percentage of that, of the skill set within that cohort, we could have accountants, marketing people, people working in councils, people working with funders, people working in sport at a high level. I don't think we tap into that enough in terms of utilising the skills within the club that are non-football specific. So in other words, people that can provide funding to enable you to send more coaches on coach education courses, to enable you to create some full-time roles in the club. In the club we were lucky, we had a CE scheme. So we were able to get some coaches that were unemployed onto a CE scheme and get them paid to coach. And we'd send them into the schools to run the schools programs that would link into our academy, that would help grow the membership in the club. Bigger membership in the club, more revenue in the club, better facilities, more money on coaches, better player improvement. All right, so we think of it like a pyramid scheme, as much as I sound like a dodgy car salesman, but essentially that's what football is. Football is a pyramid scheme. The more people play football, the more percentage chance we have of people playing for our national team. But we need to widen participation in the sport if that's the corner we're fighting. You know, we're for football. So it's what I'd say is you tap into who you have already, and don't be so suspicious of allowing parents to get involved, because I think on committees I was on previously, it was kind of, this is our committee. We can't let other people, you know, get on and have voting rights, or, you know, and there's a bit of suspicion with clubs, and maybe clubs have been burnt in the past by trying things like this. But I think we can learn a lot from schools in terms of how some of the very successful schools operate in this country, in terms of getting parents involved, looking at their skill set. Like we had one of the, I don't want to be promoting them now on your podcast, but it was an app that looked after our membership. Okay. Let's say, and the parents, when they signed up to the club, they paid their direct debit for the year through this app. They had an opportunity to pay in chunks. Most clubs use it now. Yeah. There's a data collection aspect to that, and that they agree if their children are photographed, that it can be used for publicity purposes and medical information to be used in case of emergency point of contact. I think a part that could be put onto that is, you know, an optional part, so they can choose to disclose it or not for GDPR reasons, is what do you work at? And do you think your work could benefit the club? An example being, our child welfare officer at the time was a social worker in Tala Hospital. So we ended up with a child welfare officer working in a voluntary capacity that was one of the best in the country.
Yeah.
For a period of time. She's gone now. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but that was purely from and that was from standing on the sideline talking to a coach, and I was saying to the coach, I'm looking for a CWO. If you hear of anybody, my wife works as a social worker. Brilliant. Give me her number. And she ended up being absolutely amazing for the club. She worked alongside Sport Ireland then to draft their child welfare statement, to draw up all the stuff during COVID, to deal with all the welfare issues. She was amazing. And that came from tapping into the parents, you know. So I think that's a big thing, because I think from that will answer and tick a lot of other boxes: finances, facilities, people to advocate on your behalf, people to contact local politicians. We've seen a lot of clubs recently, like I seen you had Dan English on from Corduff again. They're doing a brilliant job out there. But you look what they had to do to advocate for facilities in their area, and I can guarantee it's through the membership of the club they were able to do that. I think Knockline were in a similar situation not so long ago. They had to kind of, go and talk to politicians, but really get their parents involved. So I think that's an untapped resource in clubs that clubs need to realise. Your membership is not just your players and coaches and your committee. The biggest members in your club are the parents.
Yeah, I've never thought of it like that.
They're the biggest stakeholder in the club, and they're even in schools. And I've noticed that more from working in the ETB, because I work with homeschool liaison officers by providing education for parents in this area for schools, and the amount of untapped knowledge that parents have is astounding. It really is,
I never thought about that. Honestly, never thought about that.
It's because, as again, going through the coaching journey of like, I would have been like, keep parents arm's distance, work with the players and all that, and then like I'm kind of working away from that naturally. But it's weird one, like, because it's like, I don't know why I ever thought that you shouldn't let them in.
It's past experience, though. I mean, I've been burned a few times now by parents and stuff.
Really?
Yeah, I'm not burned in the sense that you open up the trust barrier and then it gets broken straight away.
Yeah.
And then I think humans are kind of like that. They remember one bad experience, they don't remember the 20 good ones. And I think that was kind of the
close up then a bit.
Yeah, I think that was kind of the, especially as a young coach. Let's say you're 19, 20, you feel all the pressures of recruiting players and getting the Premier, like all that normal shite, and then.
Do you know what I think of being lucky, lads, in terms of the parents I've had? And people, when I say this to coaches, it riles them because they're like, you had to give me one bad experience, and I'm like, I did have bad experiences over the years, of course I did, and like I remember having a team at Lourdes with a really good. Do you know what it was before? I left Lourdes for 2 years. I went to Shells. The first year of the National League, I had the 15s over at Shells. But I took a team from Lourdes. I was contentious at the time, but sure, I ended up going back as DOC, so the relationship wasn't that bad. But in that team alone, we had players like Luke Turner, who's with St. Pat's now. We had Stefan Egru, centre back with Oxford. Oido Omaku would have come into that team. They're players that are in around the national squad. So you're thinking that's going to be a lot of egocentric parents there, and they were the best bunch of parents ever, because what we done was we arranged trips for the kids every year. We went and played in the tournaments in the UK, etc. But we gave each of the parents a job almost. So we'd say, you're our financial group. So we set up micro groups within our group. So these parents here, you're our financial group. These two parents here, you're going to look after our athletic development nights and make sure the kids get there on time. This parent here, you're going to be a liaison for our committee. So we nearly created roles. We'd a match day kind of physio type thing and all. So as much as they were under 14s, DDSL, Premier Kennedy Cup at the time that year before we went 15s, National Shells. I realised early on that the more I involved the parents, the more it became parents, coaches and players working together, rather than coaches over here with a distrust of the parents. Now, it's not to say we didn't have the odd one or two where we kind of said, God, this, especially around the time when kids are getting called into Kennedy Cup squads or international squads, and you're getting questions, why is he there and why is he not there? And, and that's developing your soft skills. But I honestly had really good experience with parents in sport, and I think it's because you're advocating for them to be a part of it rather than drop the kid and look, we don't want anything to do with you. When I coached S&C, I'd done athletic development for 4 Gaelic football clubs around South Dublin, and I rocked up. It was a pitch session, conditioning session on my first night with I think it was Temple Oak actually, and introduced to the coaches, really diligent, professional volunteers, and they introduced me to 5 mentors. Now, I never came across it at the time. My first, I suppose, instance of working in Gaelic football in an athletic development role, and I was like, mentors? And they were like, oh yeah, we've got like 5 mentors. So well, what do they do? Do they coach? And he goes, no, they're mentors. So they're there on match day. If there's any problems, players can approach them, and they help out with fundraising. And they do. So I thought that whole idea of having mentor parents is fantastic as well. So there's lessons can be learned from every sport and everything. But I think if we're to really develop, that's a resource that we don't tap into enough, and if we allow bad experiences shape future actions, well, then we're limiting ourselves, because it's like that bad experience of education. I was in school once and it was terrible. It doesn't mean everything's going to be terrible. I bought my first car, the wheels fell off. You shouldn't stop you from buying another car.
Yeah.
It's that type of thing of, let's be more positive about it, because I think parents get a bad rap sometimes for the right reasons. For the right reasons as well. There's been some particularly within the DDSL and all the schools leagues, they've had a bit of a struggle getting a handle on it. But I think if you're clear with your expectations at the start of the season, get to know them as a person. What can you do for me? Because you know, I'm not going to run. I do the coaching. The more you can help me, the more I'm free to coach. And I'm not spending time worrying about collecting, you know, money or worrying about the logistics of the bus the weekend.
Yeah.
You know, the more you help me, the more I help your kid, because I have more time to coach them. You know, it's a bit like that, really.
It's interesting because I know there's always that kind of stuff in Ireland talked about, like facilities, and everyone, we're Irish, we love complaining about things, but that's actually such a practical solution that there's no financial constraint doing it. It's as simple as asking a question and seeing who wants to help. And if you have a group of, like you said, if you have a team of 20 players, you're talking 30, 40 parents, guardians, siblings, whatnot. If 4 of them help you, it could be such a massive difference.
But I think you've made a brilliant point at the start in saying that's something immediate nearly. So if you look at, I've seen a campaign running there recently for Dublin A for soccer facilities, for a pitch. So they've 50,000 residents in Dublin A and around the Liberties and around it, that kind of general direction over Dalton's Barn Bridge and before the city centre. 50,000 inhabitants and not one pitch. So you think of what potentially could come from that area in terms of your, as we go old school, your street footballers. A lot of them came from down that way.
Yeah,
down
Paul McGrath's
Trees' Gardens. Paul McGrath would have played in Fadiman Mansions for a while. Not one pitch.
They see that in London now, because remember Killian Phillips mentioned that there's a certain area, is it South London or something? It's where all the 5-side cages are, and there's apparently like some ridiculous amount of footballers have like been bred there, so to speak.
France
you know,
done the same thing. But if we're to hang around for government and complain and lobby government, that could take 20 years before anything happens. But we can do stuff locally and advocate ourselves in a much quicker way by tapping into resources that we already have for free. I think that's my impression of it. With the football cages, France done something similar. Very use up vacant land in around Paris. There was a lot of migrant issues in around France. No proper integration of migrant communities within France. A lot of depravity and social problems. And there's a documentary on Netflix. I don't know the name of it, but I'm sure if you Google it, you'll find it. They put a lot of these floodlit cages in. They were open 24/7. And a lot of players like Makaleli in the documentary actually says, we just played there constantly. So I don't even think it's a thing at facilities we need, as in every club needs a big full-size 11. We need facilities for kids to be able to access sport on their terms, continually and at a time of their choosing, not just in a structured coaching fashion. Although clubs do need it. Like there's 13 clubs within Dublin 12 and 10 have got over 180,000 this year in sports capital grants. Crumlin United recently have laid a new fantastic Astro. Lourdes Celtic are laying theirs in the next month or so. Temple Oak have done the same. Clubs have facilities. They actually have. If I look at Lourdes Celtic, when I played there as a kid, we trained on a tennis court and we got changed in, it wouldn't pass health and safety standards now. More like a dungeon, you know. But and you guys probably, I don't know, well, I certainly remember, I'm a wee bit older than you lads, but I remember, you know, the porter cabin changing huts that are just dropped at the side of a muddy pitch.
I've been there, yeah.
That was commonplace. That was commonplace in the DDSL, and I think now we're rocking up to places, and you know, we're seeing good facilities. So I think having facilities will help. I think creating full-time role. Now, this is me being romantic. I think coaching should be a paid profession. I definitely do. If we're serious about the sport, I think it should be a paid profession. I'm not saying astronomical money, but I think if there's a motivator for graduates coming out of college with coaching degrees and coaching qualifications and wanting to be serious about developing football in this country, I think they have to be validated. I think they have to get paid in the way they could as if they were to go. As I say, what do you mean paid? Can they go to a bank and get a mortgage? That's what I mean by paid. You know, enough to have a living wage where it'll provide them with if we want to invest in it, we're not going to invest in full-time great facilities with part-time budgets. We need, if we're serious about investing in sport as a vehicle for health, for well-being, for everything, well, then we need to put our money where our mouth is and realise the potential value it brings to society, not just the national leagues or the international teams, but sport as a vehicle for good. But I think at local levels where it's really going to happen.
On the idea of full-time academies, and there's obviously a lot of this talk kind of coming in Ireland over the last couple of years. Do you see that as the primary way to, let's say, improve the men's first team results? And let's say the English academy system is the closest to us geographically. What do you think what mistakes should we not make that they have? Because a lot of people get burnt in that system, and a few make it to the top, we'll say. So what do you think the big lesson, or what way should we go about it, do you think? In your opinion, obviously.
Yeah, in my opinion, I was lucky 2016-17 I worked for Sheffield Wednesday looking at their players that were being released to the US and scholarship programs and stuff. So we used to travel over every second week. There was myself, a guy, Paul Ford, he worked at Shells, Kelly Harrington's brother, Christopher Harrington, is working full-time in soccer now. So we travel over, we talk with Wednesday, they talk about players that are going through their education programs and all of this. And they might say, is there players in Dublin that would be as good as that left fullback or whatever? A little bit of talent ID stuff. I hate that word, but a little bit of that going on. And we might say, well, I've got a left fullback who's in with the Irish 15s at the minute. He's fantastic. Is he better than him? Or he's probably similar. Well, then we can't take him because we have to pay for him to come over and stay. And then we're going to pay for his food. That guy lives down the road. He comes after school. So a full-time academy in the UK versus here, I think we have to get away from this mistake of looking at what other countries do and think that it'll work here. Mm-hmm. We're a very different animal. We're a small country with 3 major competing sports, as in Gaelic sports, rugby and soccer. Mm-hmm. And then you've all the other niche sports as well around that. We're not full-time. I think a lot of the UK academies have taken the tier 2 academies. We've seen 8 or 9 of them shut in the past year. So they've taken the decision on financial reasons to shut their academies, because with FFP now, they're pumping money elsewhere to keep their clubs alive. Essentially, Blackburn recorded 21 million in losses today. So you're looking at that. If a full-time academy, what can we learn from it here? I think that the National League has been a good thing. I genuinely do believe that. I think from my time in it with Shells and a little bit with Rovers is I see the players getting treated well. I see them getting coached to a good standard. And I see a lot of clubs now seeing the benefits of combining, I suppose, semi-full-time, if you want to call it that, and education. So they're starting to get that right blend of, looking after both sides of the dual approach to, I suppose, player development. I don't think we can have a full-time academies here that are underfunded. Who runs them? Mm-hmm. Volunteers? Do we have fully paid staff running the academies? How long are people going to stay in that environment until they realise, well, I've got a full-time job here as well and I can't balance both? People that are trying to balance full-time jobs and coaching, something suffers eventually. Something, whether it be their home life or whatever. So if we're to go down the full-time academy route, I think it's serious investment needed. I think you need to integrate schools into it.
I was going to ask, is rather than trying to learn from another country, because we're obviously a completely different country in context, is it more to go what rugby have done well, let's say?
Yeah, I think we've tried other countries. We've looked at the Belgian thing, we've looked at the Dutch thing, to the last 2 technical directors in the FAI. Has it worked? PDP has worked to a certain extent. I think that, but is that a full-time academy? Not really. We've League of Ireland clubs doing their best with what limited resources they have. We have to ask, what would an Irish full-time academy look like? If we were to I suppose, you've England DNA, what would Ireland DNA be? We need to look at what are the specifics of it. Are we asking children to commit full-time to soccer at a young age? Again, it's not a great thing either, because we're specialising too young, too quick. Can we integrate ourselves into schools? Can that become a hybrid model? That's where I'd see it would work. Kids finish up school at maybe 2:00. From 2 to 4 o'clock, that time is given then for your sport of choice, whether that be rugby, soccer, Gaelic football. We then have coaches working within the schools alongside the schools. Then that means every single day they're getting exposure to a high level of coaching, but they're not neglecting their education, which is equally as important. They're not getting home at ridiculous o'clock. They're not having to travel an hour to a training session that's equally an hour long and an hour home, where they're 2 hours sedentary and 1 hour active. I think we like the analogy of the parents, tap into what we have instead of creating something from the ground up that's not realistic. We haven't got the funding to create full-time academies here overnight and put all that work into it. I think, like I said, I think the League of Ireland academies have been a good thing. I generally do, and I think we're starting to see players coming through. But I think to really maximise, I suppose, the potential of what we have in this country, and we've huge potential in terms of players and coming through, and the ability of coaches too, we need to support it with a well thought out model that involves not just football people. Is what I'd say. People that have different biases, or different lenses to us, that may look at it in a different way, and get financial people involved, or whoever we have to get involved, incorporate the school system.
Yeah, I was only thinking about that because I've always thought of it like the rugby skills, and then like, we should have football skills. But the more I think about it, and I know we could get down into the idea of like early specialization. That's a whole other rabbit hole. But if you look at what the English clubs have made mistakes with, it's that idea of the 5-6-year-old comes into the academy, is a professional footballer at that age, and then they burn off by the time they get to.
Have you ever Googled the UK full-time academy? The first 30-something search results, none of them are football clubs.
Oh, really?
They're all private full-time academies. So it's a commodification of the academy model. So essentially what's happened is people have set up businesses, called them full-time academies. So I was lucky enough last year to visit. We were on a club visit to the UK, and we ended up going to the Stephen Gerrard Academy for a day. And I was just intrigued to see what way this worked. And I went into it quite sceptical, thinking, what are the facilities going to be like? Are they just using the name to... But we were brought on a tour around classrooms, student digs, coaching facilities. The level of coaching they were getting was quite good. Do I know what the stats are on the back of it? How successful the players have been in securing?
Is that purely football?
It's purely soccer. Yeah, there are a lot of kids from the US come over, essentially, and they pay. They pay, but they're also getting tuition in the third level alongside it. They're staying in Liverpool. They're so that's a kind of hybrid model of a private academy. That's probably got more chance of success than some of the other academies in the clubs, because they're integrating. It's more holistic in nature. They're getting time to socialise with their peers in a foreign country. They're getting their education. They're getting a high level of coaching. They're doing it in good facilities. So I definitely think if it's a full-time academy area, it has to incorporate education.
So
it has to involve the parents. I don't mean in a practical sense, but I mean, we spend so much time coaching and teaching players and very little time informing the parents about why and what we're doing. Why is your kid here at 10, 12 years of age? What's the expectations? What are the outcomes? What role can you play? What is our role? What are the barriers? What are the limitations to what you can and can't do? And I think the more we integrate everybody like that, schools, guidance counsellors, get them all in on the conversation and listen to kids, because we think that we know it all, and we seldom stop and say to them, what would you think of a full-time academy? What would it look like if you were to design it? Like we said earlier on, what would education look like if we were to go back and redesign our childhoods? And I know what it looked like. We do very little study. We'd all be out playing football and whatnot. But realistically, it is about listening to people and doing it in an Irish context, because we are quite different in that we have that, I think, a potential of using the cross transferability of skills of all the sports.
That's what I was going to say, because imagine the schools, like I was getting to the point of making, I've always thought of it like, there's rugby skills, we should have football skills. But if you imagine like multi-sport skills, where like from when let's say you start at a 5-year-old, they could be exposed to 3 or 4 different sports throughout the week. As they get to late teens, then you're like, right, well, what's your secret sauce? What's your sport going to be? And then you all of a sudden can build up that contact time, but like that, not doing it in the way that the elitism in one sport comes in too soon.
Yeah, they're getting exposed. They're getting exposed to all movement skills, and they're getting exposed to all different types of load and all different types of, I suppose, cognitive experiences. They're getting to sample different sports, and some of the top clubs recognise this as well, and they know that. Like, I remember talking to Des Ryan, who worked at Arsenal for a time, and Des had like wacky Wednesdays where he had them playing Gaelic football and rugby.
In Arsenal,
yeah, and it's you can Google that. He's got it up there, but there was a good reason behind it.
Yeah,
he was exposing them to different movement patterns, so they weren't getting fatigued and burnt out by the same physical load all the time. There's different cognitive elements to it that transferred into sport. The GAA at one stage scoured the border region up around Ulster looking for rugby players that were dropping out of rugby, because they had the same kind of power output and jump forces and same kind of lateral movements that we would have had in other sports. Like if you think of rugby, GAA, soccer, they're all field-based invasion games using similar energy systems, similar movement patterns. The only thing that's different is the skill demands and the rules. That's it. But if you have kids coming up in multi-sport schools, we call them, if that's the model, they're getting exposed to everything. And it's a much healthier childhood. And I think on the back of that, rather than getting 10 footballers at a full-time professional level, we might get 2 athletics champions, we might get 5 footballers, you might get 2 rugby players.
Not as many get burnt, so to speak.
Yeah, but we might also get 500 kids that now stay in sport for longer because they've had a better experience. And that should be the real goal in terms of the participation, at least.
It's interesting, other sports, one of the players would have worked with, I would have worked with him, but he would have came from rugby into football. And I remember asking him why he'd done some things in football, and he would just go, just in rugby, I'll just go at people. And he just has no concept of the fear of losing the ball, where someone who's too football program will be like, oh, I can't go at him here because if I lose it, then there's it. But he's just rugby mindset of carry the ball at things or at people. It's just interesting how the mindset carried into football and actually probably makes him a good footballer because he has that lack of fear of doing some actions like that. It's interesting, the psychology of it.
Yeah, it's just different sports require different things, isn't it? If you watch kids that it often doing warm-up games, even little fun games or basketball, or I remember as a soccer form we used to think called rugby, and people said rugby, so it's a warm-up game of 5 aside, but you're kicking a rugby ball. So
on the ground.
You look at the reaction of a rugby ball, it's like a reaction ball for a goalkeeper. It'll bounce everywhere. But the kids they're loving it, and it's just great crack because it's different. A different moving pattern, a different load, a different way of thinking, and sometimes we need to do that as well. Just to chaos is good.
Coaches too. I mean, when COVID kicked in, we became basketball obsessed, and one thing I thought was very interesting with basketball was 1v1 play. So
amazing.
And let's say back to goal, front facing hips. And I remember me and Morgan used to kill each other. Well, he used to kill me outside playing basketball. But small things like dropping your shoulder and then watching the defender's movement. And then you could easily transfer those same actions of the physical aspects straight into the pitch, especially in front of goal. That's what basketball is. It's all about creating the art of separation to have an increased probability of hitting the target. And it's the exact same in the box.
And I think that the fascinating thing, like you say about basketball, I think that we can learn in soccer is the amount of what I call micro movements to lose your marker. They're not big curved runs or movements into big space because they haven't got it. It's a court game. So it's all these micro movements. And I even teaching agility. If I'm talking to coaches in workshops, I'll often look at what they're doing in terms of agility. You might see a ladder thrown out or a cone, and they have them run through the cones, and there's no cognitive load to it. So I kind of say, look, we just do a game of bulldog. That's agility because you have to think about the person, the space, the movement. That's real agility because it's cognitive load. Or play a game of basketball because basketball is agility rich. So I think we can learn. It's one thing I'll say to you. I know we talked about young coaches earlier, but don't be remiss to not learn from other sports because there's always something. You may not like the sport. Like I went into Gaelic football thinking, oh God, I don't really, I'm not really keen on Gaelic football. No disservice to the sport. I think they train as good as any athlete and they have a great organisation. But I learned so much in a year and a bit experience of working with Gaelic football teams that I was able to then bring back to soccer and say, even in the coaching structure of how they do things or the coach education, how they structure the coach education, a very hybrid model, and they'll do theory some nights and then they're on the pitch a lot. And we can learn so much from other sports, I think, as coaches as well, and how they do things or how they operate,
Yeah, look, I honestly, Alan, I could spend here for the next 12 hours talking to you because I really enjoyed that conversation. I really did, but I know you've got a busy schedule and we appreciate the time that you've taken out today, but I just really wanted to say I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah. Thanks so much, guys.
No, it was great.
I enjoyed it.
It's funny because I'm calling Claffy out here because he was bigging you up big time. I didn't want to say it beforehand, but
all right,
it lived up.
Yeah, no,
It lived up.
Claffy, you got a spot on there, man.